The Toronto Maple Leafs have tried almost everything. They've hired elite coaches. They've built around superstar talent. They've invested millions into one of the NHL's most skilled cores. Yet every spring, the same conversation returns. Why can't this team get over the hump? That's why the arrival of John Chayka has become one of the most fascinating stories in hockey. This isn't just another front office change. It's a gamble on a completely different way of building a Stanley Cup contender. And if Chayka succeeds, he could change the direction of one of hockey's most scrutinized franchises. To understand why this hire has generated so much attention, you have to understand who John Chayka really is. Unlike most NHL general managers, Chayka didn't spend decades climbing through the traditional hockey ranks. He wasn't a longtime coach or a former NHL star. Instead, he made his name through analytics and advanced statistics. Long before data became a major part of hockey decision-making, Chayka believed teams could gain an edge by looking beyond goals, assists, and plus-minus. He founded a hockey analytics company that attracted attention from NHL organizations, and in 2016, at just 26 years old, he became the youngest general manager in league history when the Arizona Coyotes hired him. At the time, the hockey world was divided. Some executives believed Chayka represented the future of NHL management. Others questioned whether someone so young and without a traditional hockey background could successfully build a winning team. It was one of the biggest experiments the league had ever seen. My take is that both sides had valid points. Analytics can uncover valuable information, but hockey is still played by people, not spreadsheets. The challenge has always been finding the right balance between data and experience. During his time in Arizona, Chayka immediately showed he wasn't afraid to make bold decisions. Rather than chasing expensive star players, he focused on finding undervalued talent and acquiring assets that could strengthen the organization over time. He made several creative trades, looked for players whose impact went beyond traditional statistics, and tried to build a younger, faster roster. There were moments when that strategy looked promising. Several players flourished after arriving in Arizona, and league observers began to recognize that Chayka had an eye for identifying value where other teams weren't looking. Even with one of the NHL's smallest budgets, the Coyotes became more competitive than many expected. They weren't Stanley Cup favorites, but they were building an identity based on speed, structure, and smart roster management. But Chayka's time in Arizona wasn't defined only by success. The organization became involved in controversy after the NHL penalized the Coyotes for violating draft testing rules during the 2020 NHL draft process. The league stripped Arizona of draft picks, creating another obstacle for a franchise already trying to rebuild. Shortly afterward, Chayka unexpectedly resigned from the organization, leaving many questions unanswered. Reports at the time suggested he was pursuing opportunities outside hockey, while the Coyotes publicly expressed disappointment over the timing of his departure. That ending changed how many people viewed his tenure. Some believed Chayka had been one of the league's brightest young executives, working under difficult circumstances. Others argued that his unfinished project and controversial exit raised legitimate concerns about his leadership. Even today, opinions remain divided, and that's exactly why his opportunity with Toronto feels so significant. The Maple Leafs aren't hiring someone with a perfect resume. They're hiring someone with tremendous upside and real questions attached to his career. In many ways, this is a second chance for Chayka and for a franchise desperate to change its story. Here's what makes Toronto such a unique challenge. Talent has never really been the issue. The Maple Leafs have one of the NHL's strongest cores, led by captain Auston Matthews, one of the most complete goal scorers in modern hockey. Alongside Matthews, players like William Nylander have consistently produced at an elite offensive level, while Morgan Rielly has remained one of the team's most important leaders on the blue line. Year after year, this group has shown it can dominate during the regular season, but the playoffs have told a different story. Time after time, Toronto has struggled to turn regular season success into deep postseason runs. Opponents have exposed weaknesses in defensive coverage. Depth scoring has disappeared in key moments. Physical play has become a challenge, and small mistakes have often changed entire series. That's where Chayka's philosophy becomes interesting. Rather than asking how to make the team's biggest stars even better, his approach has always focused on strengthening everything around them. Championship teams don't rely on one line. They don't depend on one defenseman, and they certainly don't expect one superstar to carry 4 playoff rounds by himself. History shows that Stanley Cup winners usually receive contributions from every part of the lineup. Their third line scores timely goals. Their penalty killers protect narrow leads. Their depth defensemen play meaningful minutes without becoming liabilities. Every player has a clearly defined role. That's something Toronto has struggled to achieve consistently. From what people around the league have observed throughout Chayka's career, he places enormous value on roster balance. Finding players who outperform their contracts. Building depth without sacrificing financial flexibility. Identifying pieces that fit together instead of simply collecting the biggest names available. If he can successfully apply that philosophy in Toronto, it could fundamentally change how this team performs when playoff hockey begins. Of course, that's much easier said than done. The Maple Leafs operate under a microscope unlike almost any other franchise in professional sports. Every trade becomes national news. Every losing streak creates headlines. Every playoff defeat sparks another wave of criticism from fans and media alike. John Chayka knew exactly what he was signing up for. The question now isn't whether he can make bold decisions. He's already proven throughout his career that he isn't afraid to challenge conventional thinking. The real question, the one that will define his legacy in Toronto, is whether his unconventional approach can finally solve a problem that has frustrated the Maple Leafs for decades. And that's where the next chapter of this story becomes even more fascinating. If there's one thing John Chayka understands better than anyone walking into Toronto, it's that talent alone doesn't win the Stanley Cup. The NHL has proven that over and over again. Every season, highly skilled teams enter the playoffs with championship expectations, only to be eliminated by clubs that are deeper, tougher, and better prepared for playoff hockey. That's the lesson the Maple Leafs have learned the hard way for nearly a decade. And that's where Chayka's biggest challenge really begins. It's one thing to build a team capable of winning 50 games during the regular season. It's something completely different to build one that can survive 4 straight best-of-7 playoff series. My take is that this is exactly where Chayka's philosophy will either succeed or fail. Throughout his career, he's believed that every roster spot matters, not just the superstars. That means evaluating players differently. Instead of asking, can this player score 30 goals? The better question becomes, can this player help us win Game 7 on the road? Those are 2 completely different conversations. Take Auston Matthews, for example. Nobody questions his ability to score goals. He's already established himself as one of the NHL's elite forwards and one of the league's most complete players. But even Matthews would probably tell you that individual awards mean very little if the team continues falling short in the postseason. That's why Chayka's job isn't to change Matthews. It's to build a roster that allows Matthews to be even more effective when playoff defenses focus entirely on shutting him down. The same can be said for William Nylander. Over the past several seasons, Nylander has developed into one of Toronto's most dangerous offensive weapons. His skating, creativity, and ability to produce in big moments have made him one of the franchise's most valuable players. But playoff hockey is about more than offensive production. It's about winning battles along the boards, protecting the puck under pressure, making smart decisions when every turnover can change a series. That's why organizational depth becomes so important. When opponents throw everything they have at Toronto's top line, someone else has to make them pay. Championship teams always have unexpected heroes. Sometimes it's a fourth-line forward scoring an overtime winner. Sometimes it's a depth defenseman stepping up after an injury. Sometimes it's a backup player who suddenly becomes one of the biggest stories of the playoffs. The point is simple. The Stanley Cup is rarely won by star players alone. That's one area where Chayka's roster-building philosophy could make a real difference. Instead of investing all of the team's resources into a handful of elite players, his reputation has always been built around finding value throughout the lineup. Players who may not generate headlines, players who don't always appear on highlight reels, but players who consistently help teams win. There's another reason this approach matters. The NHL salary cap leaves almost no room for mistakes. One bad contract can limit flexibility for years. One overpayment can prevent a team from adding the depth it desperately needs at the trade deadline. That's something Chayka has always emphasized throughout his management career. Finding value. Projecting future performance rather than rewarding past achievements. Looking beyond reputation and asking whether a player still fits the long-term vision of the organization. Some fans love that philosophy. Others believe hockey can't be reduced to numbers and projections. Honestly, both arguments have merit. Analytics have become a major part of modern hockey, but the best organizations know that data is only one piece of the puzzle. Character matters, leadership matters, experience matters, and perhaps most importantly, knowing how players respond under pressure matters. That's something Toronto has struggled with for years. The Maple Leafs haven't lacked confidence entering the playoffs. They've lacked consistency once adversity arrives. Think back to many of their postseason exits. A missed defensive assignment, a costly turnover, an untimely penalty, a game that slips away despite controlling large portions of the play. Those moments don't happen because players suddenly forget how to play hockey. They happen because playoff hockey demands a different level of execution. Every mistake gets punished. Every opportunity becomes more valuable. Every shift feels heavier than the last. From what analysts around the league have consistently pointed out, that's exactly where Toronto has fallen short. Not because they aren't talented,